Jean Manning is a journalist who stumbled into a strange world when she started asking questions about alternative energy sources and heard the story of an early 20th century inventor named Nikola Tesla.
Tesla is almost a cult hero and an overlooked genius, and he has so many inventions that are at the basis of technologies that we have today.
She went to a conference on Tesla and had a close encounter with a mysterious scientific researcher who became her deep throat, her Mr. X.
He sent me a file of materials about the Bernard Eastlund patent.
About a month ago, the U.S. Patent Office granted a patent to a Houston-based scientist, Dr. Bernard Eastlund, for an invention which, Dr. Eastlund says, could be used to change the weather. Dr. Eastlund says the invention could also be used to disrupt communications all over the world and might be used to destroy or deflect a missile attack.
The Eastlund patents had the ring of the mad scientist aspect of Tesla. Tesla talked about this Tesla shield around the planet and talked about particle beam weaponry, something called a death ray.
Death ray? Jean wasn't sure where all this was leading until Mr. X called again.
And he said, the maniacs are actually going to do it up in Alaska.
Mr. X's maniacs were in the U.S. Pentagon, and he was convinced they were conspiring to build Bernard Eastlund's Sky Zapper under the guise of a nice little research project deep in the Alaskan bush called Haarp.
The basic concept is to build a very large antenna, then to utilize a large amount of power and to beam those radio waves up into the upper atmosphere.
Have you approached the Pentagon with this invention?
Yes, and what I'm not at liberty to tell you is the details of what that interaction has been.
The word spread through the Alaskan bush, and soon a band of suspicious Alaskans set out to warn people about what they saw as the U.S. military's secret agenda.
And what you have with Haarp is sort of the universal hammer for geophysical warfare.
Nick Begich is the chief conspiracy theorist.
So when did you know that you were onto something?
I think as soon as I saw the references to Tesla's work, and when I read Bernard Eastlund's original patents, I realized that what we really had here in Alaska was a prototype for a ground-based Star Wars weapon system.
Haarp is a non-classified project run not by Bernard Eastlund, but by the U.S. Army and Navy. The official Haarp story is told by one man, John Heckscher.
It consists of several types of transmitting instruments and numerous scientific instruments that study the natural ionosphere and the ionosphere that has been perturbed by the instruments that we are building.
The ionosphere is a sea of electrically charged particles in the upper atmosphere, and the instrument is a powerful radio wave transmitter.
Does it have any military applications?
The site itself is strictly a scientific research site. Perhaps the outcome of some of the science, perhaps some of the results, could be applied in to military systems.
Just a little physics project? Jim Roderick isn't buying it. He's been gunning for the real goods on Haarp, and his weapon is the internet.
The military is incapable of doing pure science. Science is conducted by them for application in weapon systems, for no other reasons.
From his shack in the middle of an Alaskan village, Jim and his co-conspirators around the globe have been tapping into databases. They've dredged up hundreds of long-buried scientific reports and even some internal documents from the military. They call it the world's first techno-protest, and they did it all on the military's own baby, the net.
Plans for Haarp activities correlate with projections of what can be done in the Eastland patents. It's that simple.
So it's not a coincidence?
It's not a coincidence.
Well, I hate to disagree with you, but it's not his patent that we're building. Superficially, yes. They send energy up into the ionosphere, but the Eastland patents require huge, prodigious, in fact, amounts of power, like 100 billion watts.
Remember that number, 100 billion watts. You'll hear it again later.
Haarp requires only 3 million watts.
There is a paper trail leading
No.
us back to Eastland.
No, there is not. There is no paper trail that I'm aware of that's leading back to Eastland. Eastland used to be an employee of the company which is building Haarp, but that's pure coincidence.
Is it also a coincidence that the tiny company that owned Eastland's patents was later swallowed up by an enormous military intelligence firm called E-Systems?
2.1 billion in annual sales, 1.8 billion of that, with a B, was to military intelligence groups, CIA, NSA, and others. And of that, 800 million were black projects, so secret that even the United States Congress didn't know what they were.
E-Systems was then swallowed up by Raytheon Corporation. It too specializes in super secret contracts with the Pentagon.
Why would Raytheon be so excited about this? Well, it's a ground-based Star Wars weapon prototype. For them, it represents potentially billions and billions of dollars.
So how would you describe this world of E-Systems and Raytheon and Haarp?
Dark.
There's a lot of people around here that have a really lot of strange ideas, and I think many of them are pretty bizarre.
Michelle Angbritson keeps the Haarp computers from freezing up in between visits from the military scientists.
Do you know, do you understand what they're doing here when the scientists come in?
You mean when the scientists come in and shoot the beams up? Yeah, they're shooting the beams up, and I think that heats a little small space in the ionosphere, and then you've got guys that are sitting on computers, and you've got people putting up weather poles that measure weather and everything like that. I mean, there's nothing spooky going on here.
There have been claims made by some scientists that that you could heat up the ionosphere and affect local weather.
If you were to do Eastland patents, I have no doubt that's the case.
Claims are being made that it could disrupt global communications.
Global?
That it could shut down another country's communication system and enhance your own.
Not Haarp. Not Haarp in
As it is
Alaska.
now.
No.
But you couldn't disable any systems?
Those that use, if the systems used a path which was accessible to the Haarp beam, yes.
Starting to sound like Eastland's invention to you? Well, remember, John Heckscher says Haarp has nowhere near the power levels Eastland talked about.
It seems like this entire thing has been a matter of disinformation.
Eric Nashlin understands the military. He spent 15 years in the service as a radio engineer. He knows deception.
It came to our attention that there was a document, a technical memorandum, I think it was 195 or something like that. And reading right in the front of it, they said that, bottom line, although this is here, it does not constitute publication.
It doesn't exist.
It basically doesn't exist. So it was kind of like, wow, here's the document that doesn't exist. We're talking several hundred pages of document that, doesn't exist on a project that is completely unclassified and open to the public.
We got it through friendly folks in the right spots, but it really lays out, these are notes from a conference that really break down where they were going to use this technology and how this technology was going to be applied.
Remember the 100 billion watts debate? Well, for Nick Begich, this document was pay dirt.
And in the document that we uncovered, the actual desired level of these researchers is 100 billion watts, and there we're talking something closer to the order of what Bernard Eastland envisioned.
You must be familiar with Technical Memorandum 195, which talks about a desired level of 100 billion watts.
Which memorandum?
Technical Memorandum 195.
I'm not familiar with that number.
Well, it's about 600 pages. And I mean, you may not acknowledge it because it hasn't been published, but it exists. I've seen it.
I don't know what Technical Memorandum 195 is, because I haven't seen it.
This is a published document. It's non-released. And it's the word games that John Heckscher plays and the word games the United States military plays, and it's the word games they continue to play, and those are the things that need to end.
Zap incoming missiles, disrupt global communications, and engineer the weather. And ready? There's one more. Some people believe the technology being tested here could be used for sinister projects involving humans. Radio waves messing around with people's brain waves. And guess what? The military denies this one, too.
The human mind is subject to being affected by radio frequency energy, and that's what this device is.
In other words, you can move the moods of large populations using this kind of technology.
So now we have not just maniacs in the Pentagon, but a bunch of Dr. Strangeloves? Pretty weird stuff. But scientists have been experimenting with radio frequencies on animals' brains for decades. And the military has followed it all very closely, especially once it found out the Russians were onto it.
It was all kept a deep, dark secret by the two superpowers.
Back in the 60s, the Soviets began zapping the American embassy in Moscow with a low-frequency beam. No one knows for sure what they were up to, but one theory is that they were trying to mess with people's central nervous systems. And one report did say the diplomats got depressed a lot. And hey, just think of all the nifty applications against the enemy. Why blow people up when you can drive them crazy?
From documents dating back into the early 80s, we see that the military had discussed the possibilities of mind control through radio frequency energy. The possibility is there. The military has studied it.
A 1982 Air Force report called radio frequency energy a major new research initiative and said that RF can, quote, disrupt normal purposeful behavior. A 1987 military report called for more research on RF energy as a non-lethal weapon, while pointing out that most of the existing technology is classified. And sure enough, in 1993, there was a big conference at Johns Hopkins University. Here, the entire conference was classified. But the agenda wasn't, and weapons using extremely low radio frequencies, or ELFs, were listed as a very attractive option.
Is it just a coincidence that there's been all of this talk and that Haarp will be experimenting with this? Is that all just coincidence?
I believe the ability of ELF to affect the mind is a side issue for us. It may be real. I can't say.
It's been exceedingly difficult to find information on what is supposed to be a major new initiative of the military. All we see is Haarp.
Well, then I'm being kept in the dark, if that's the case.
The question is, could they, would they? And we believe they can, and we believe they will. Somewhere, at some point, all of this technology merges at some level within the Pentagon, and it happens to be in Alaska, and it happens to be now.
Yeah, again, the term geoengineering, aka chemtrails, that are the layman's term for what we see happening in the skies, but this is weather modification on a global scale. In fact, these programs are so large and so all-encompassing that all other weather modification programs that go on a smaller regional basis are virtually, they're negated by the scope and scale of the global geoengineering programs. And these programs involve a number of aspects. You have the saturation of the atmosphere with various chemical and metal particulates. And there appear to be various purposes and objectives with this saturation. In conjunction with the saturation, which ionizes the atmosphere, it makes the atmosphere more conductive, we have the Haarp facilities, High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program. These are ionosphere heaters. Many have heard of the Haarp facilities. There's not just one or two or three. We believe there's at least 18 around the globe, possibly with 3 more being built in Antarctica right now. And once the atmosphere is saturated with these particulates, and then you add the ionosphere heaters, the entire weather system globally is virtually being thwarted. There is no natural weather at this point, and we really don't know what sort of climate conditions we would have necessarily if these programs were brought to a halt, and they desperately need to be brought to a halt, because the saturation of the atmosphere is thwarting the hydrological cycle. It's totally disrupting the rain cycle. Again, we have the artificially nucleated snowstorms, which I just mentioned. You can't go from 100 degrees to snow in one day without a whole lot of help. This includes jet stream manipulation with the Haarp facilities, and we are not guessing at this. We have monitoring sources for this signal, and we can see where the signal is most intense, and that's what steers the jet stream. So then you add artificial ice nucleation, which is a chemical nucleation process. They can turn what should have been rain into snow and drop the temperatures of these storm systems by this artificial chemical nucleation. This isn't sci-fi, this is hard science fact. The weather disseminating agencies are trying desperately their task, and they're all owned at the very top, it appears, by the Rothschilds and or other parts of the global elite complex. Rothschilds in particular are ownership of Weather Channel, Weather Central, Weather Underground, and it was imperative that they own these agencies, otherwise there would be great discrepancy in trying to explain away these events.
China and Russia have modified a layer of the Earth's atmosphere above Europe to test a technology that could be used as a weather warfare weapon. 5 experiments were conducted last June. On June 7, one experiment caused a physical disturbance over an area nearly 50,000 square miles wide. The modified atmospheric zone was 310 miles, that's 500 kilometers, over a small Russian town in Eastern Europe. The atmospheric zone experienced an electric spike with 10 times more negatively charged subatomic particles as in neighboring regions. Another experiment was conducted on June 12, 2018. The Russian and Chinese scientists were able to dramatically heat up a thin ionized gas in a high-altitude layer of our atmosphere. The temperature was elevated by 212 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 100 degrees Celsius. The electrons were pumped into the atmosphere by Sura, an atmospheric heating facility in Russia. Sura's high-powered antennas injected a massive amount of microwaves into the upper level of our atmosphere. A Chinese electromagnetic surveillance satellite assisted the Russians in the experiment by analyzing atmospheric samples every half a second and sending data to Sura. Military war planners in Western nations have long been interested in weaponizing the weather. For example, changing the ionosphere over enemy territory can allow the military to cripple the enemy's ability to communicate through satellites. Low-frequency radio signals can also penetrate the ground or water and make it impossible to communicate with attack submarines. Edward Zoll and Doc Burkhart are here to discuss some disturbing news published today by the South China Morning Post about these joint experiments by Chinese and Russian scientists in manipulating the Earth's atmosphere. Gentlemen, I've been talking about this for 20 years.
Yes.
You know, we started out in 1999 talking about Haarp.
Right.
And if you mentioned Haarp, you were called a tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist because nobody wanted to admit that in the so-called mainstream media, they didn't even want to admit that Haarp existed.
That's right.
Let alone that it was doing any kind of atmospheric experiments. So now here we are today, and I want to put up on the screen, this is the South China Morning Post newspaper headline. South China Morning Post, excellent newspaper in Hong Kong. I read it every day. Great source of news for the Asian area. And the headline says, China and Russia band together on controversial heating experiments to modify the atmosphere.
This isn't the National Enquirer.
No, South China Morning Post in Hong Kong. Now, if True News published a story that said U.S. government working on heating, doing heating experiments to modify the atmosphere, then the New York Times and the Washington Post and Huffington Post, they would mock us.
Right.
True News spreading wild conspiracy theories. But here it is today. That's the South China Morning Post in Hong Kong.
Well, Rick, we're not studying a graduate program in plasma physics. That's the difference. Is that not only do we now know that this has been going on for more than 30, 40 years, the Chinese have at least started doing this since 2012. But the thing that concerns me about this story, Rick, is that the scientists themselves, actually Professor Go Lixin, the Dean of School of Physics and Optoelectronic Engineering at Zhejiang University in Zhejiang Province in China, he said it's incredibly rare for China to work with another country, especially even Russia, to do an experiment like this, which raises the prospect, one, why are they now writing so openly about it? And two, what do the Chinese and Russians know that we, as Americans in the West, are refusing to accept?
It's interesting because it's openly discussed in the Asia region. They're not hiding it.
That's right.
But in the United States, if you discuss it, you're mocked. You're ridiculed. You're called a conspiracy theorist. And mostly, I would say 95% of the American people have never heard of Haarp.
Right.
They don't know that it exists.
The High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, located up in Alaska, has been in operation now for a couple decades. And there was a gap in time there where it shut down for just a little while. It supposedly shut down, but now it's active again. But I remember various programs, including yours, Rick, that talked about Haarp long ago, back in the late 90s, early 2000s.
I used to interview Nick Begich.
Yes. Yeah, he had the book, Angels Don't Play That Harp.
That's right.
So, yeah. And
that's a good title. I haven't read the book.
Nick Begich was the first person to come out and really make a case about what had been built in Alaska. And again, he was ridiculed. But a number of us have talked about it.
And I remember them denying the facility even existed.
Yes.
Remember that?
Yes.
They were saying there's no such facility like this. That's all, imagination. And then it turns out it was true. And
well, there was a day, Doc, if you talked about the NSA, people said it meant no such agency.
Right.
Which we now know to be in itself a conspiracy because it absolutely exists. And now we've had to accept its existence along with its violation of our Fourth Amendment rights here in America. But I think the biggest takeaway, Rick, from this is that you look at the capability of this technology. Let's say just the capability that Chinese are admitting to. One of them is that on a test on June 12th, they're claiming they were able to heat up the ionosphere. Now, the ionosphere separates Earth's atmosphere with space. They were to heat the temperature, you said 100 degrees Celsius.
212 degrees Fahrenheit.
Incredible.
Yes.
Boil water.
Yes.
Let's say there are a lot of nations that are in the northern hemisphere that rely on snow and snowstorms to be able to produce the rainwater that they'll have for farming, for example, in the spring and summer. Let's say the military application of this, if it were to be used like this, could be it being deployed over, let's say, North America, another farming area, maybe against Russia. And the country would not be able to farm for a season or two.
Could you argue that the Chinese and the Russians are actually preparing for an ice age?
Well, we were talking about that before the Godcast began today, that if you knew that the upper ionosphere was cooling down because of lower sunspot activity, wouldn't you want to have a device that could actually warm it back up? And that's exactly what this would be. That's what Haarp would be, and that's what this device would be as well, the ability to reheat the ionosphere that had cooled down.
And we know that the Chinese are building an artificial sun and artificial moons.
Yes.
So the Chinese are being very proactive right now in developing science capabilities of affecting the atmosphere either over China. If it's a more sinister purpose, then they're looking for ways to change the atmosphere over other nations.
Right.
So going back to this this South China Morning Post, so they're talking about a Russian base called Sura. Sura is kind of like the American Haarp, and so the Russians have been conducting atmospheric heating experiments, actually going back to the Soviet days.
That's correct. And this is a facility they've resurrected of sorts, if they ever stopped, let's say. But the article notes that this was a resurrected facility near Vasylsursk. And the part that I felt was incredibly interesting with this is that the amount of power it takes. You know, there are a lot of talk about HAARP in the past is that one way you could prove it was to just show a large influx of power going out to a remote area. There would be no reason, for example, one of the things they said here is the Sura facility at Vasylsursk in eastern Russia, in Eastern Europe rather, produced the same amount of power as a small city. This is the amount of power being used to affect the atmosphere, but in other words, this would be used to heat and even to power the homes of a city.
Well, when they heated, and this is just months ago, June of this year, when they heated the ionosphere, it was 49,000 square miles. That's like half the size of Great Britain.
Right.
So technically, they have the capability of warming up a nation, at least half of a nation the size of Great Britain. Now, could you double the heat? Could you triple the heat?
It all would require the amount of energy that you put into the system.
Yes. And
I read in the South China Morning Post article where they were trying to explain how this works, that the waves are sent out and bounces off the ionosphere like a mirror, but that's not quite right. What it's actually doing, it's hitting the atmosphere and bouncing. It's more like a ball hitting a wall. There's energy being transferred from the ball to the wall, and the ball bounces, right? It's the same thing with these energy waves. The energy is being transferred as it hits the ionosphere. So even in shortwave, for instance, shortwave radio, it bounces off the ionosphere. There is some activity that actually occurs when the waves hit the ionosphere. It all depends on how much energy is put into the system. If you put 1,000 watts in, you get so much energy. You put 1,000,000 watts in, that does a bigger job at heating up the ionosphere. But there still is you can't deny the laws of physics. Physics will transfer energy to someplace else. That's why the waves diminish as they continue to bounce down the lane. So
I want to go to this next news article. This was published June 2nd of this year. Again, South China Morning Post. Again, one of the most reputable newspapers in Asia. Okay, so again, this is not a National Enquirer, this is not a tabloid, this is the South China Morning Post. The headline, could this new Chinese radar system really be used to play God with the weather? Open discussion in Hong Kong about a Chinese
version of HAARP.
Yes.
Their version. And Rick, they don't mince words. They say that this could be used. In the article it says it has civilian and military applications and could challenge U.S. dominance in both spheres. So this is clearly, the way this is written, this isn't simply for the protection of agricultural needs or research. They're noting here that this can be used as an offensive weapon or deterrence. Now the island, another part to this, they call it the high-powered incoherent scatter radar. HISR is the Chinese version of HAARP, and it's actually based near a very highly populated town in Henan province. It's the southernmost tip of China. It has approximately 400,000 people living near this town. The Chinese, unlike, let's say, the Americans and the Russians, were so desperate to get this up and running that they risked putting it next to a large population center. And I say this because the sort of long theory is that there is a health effect when you're next to a radar or a microelectronic facility. We know that, for example, with power lines here in America.
I agree. And we've heard this for years in the radio industry.
Yes.
I want to go back to that South China article. Could this Chinese radar system really be used to play God with the weather? There we go. We'll leave it on the screen there for just a minute. I want to read the first couple paragraphs of what was published June 2nd, 2018. The South China Morning Post said, China is building a powerful radar system in the South China Sea that critics say could knock out communication systems manipulate the weather, and even cause natural disasters. The system, which sounds like something out of science fiction, uses pulsed energy beams to study and manipulate electrically charged particles in the high atmosphere. It has civilian and military applications and could challenge U.S. dominance in both spheres. What a stunning introduction to a news article.
So you've got the Chinese/Russian version of Haarp, and then you've got specialized radar systems that China is developing to try to manipulate the weather. So they're advancing very quickly in this arena, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
It seems like the U.S. is backing away from this, or if they aren't backing away, they've hidden it. And we know that they've been working on this for decades here in the U.S., but it seems like China now just basically opened up the gate and said, we are going to develop this technology. What would motivate them to try to manipulate the weather so quickly, Rick, unless they knew something was about to happen globally that could impact, their 1.2 billion population? Could it be that there's going to be a weather change that's taking place?
Yes, it could be that they're being motivated by an advancing ice age, or they're being motivated by an advancing World War III. And because you can use this technology to disrupt communications.
Yes.
I want to go back to this article. I want to read another paragraph. The largest devices can generate and beam extremely low frequency waves over large areas. Because they have the power to penetrate water, the Earth's crust, now listen to this, and the human skull.
Yes.
Some observers have warned that the governments could use the technology to set off storms or earthquakes and even control the brain. Doc, this is what...
It sounds like they've been reading from a True News article.
This is what Haarp commentators in America have said for 20 years,
yes.
And we were mocked and ridiculed and laughed at and called all kinds of names. I could show you articles right now from, various newspapers and television networks and science publications that mockingly say, sorry, conspiracy theorists, but Haarp cannot trigger an earthquake. Haarp is not used for mind control. It's always like only idiots would believe that. Only stupid, uneducated Trump voters would believe such things, okay? But here is the South China Morning Post saying these beams can penetrate water, the Earth's crust, and the human skull.
Right. Which caught my attention in this article, because think about all the reports and articles that we've heard over the past year and escalated in the past few months about people losing their hearing, having things happen in their brain. Reports in Cuba, also reports in China itself.
You're talking about the embassies
Yes.
In China and also Havana, and that was U.S. State Department employees that were experiencing this loss of hearing and incoherence.
What about the mysterious humming that people have heard all over the world?
Yes.
In some towns, it's nonstop. People go about their daily lives hearing a high-pitched humming sound. In other places, it's sporadic. It appears, and you have a lot of people in a region that can hear a sound, and they're told that it's mass hypnosis. People are making themselves believe that they're hearing. No, they're hearing something.
I'm making myself believe I hear humming.
Yes.
So.
And here's South China Morning Post is saying governments could use the technology to set off storms, trigger earthquakes, control the brain.
Yes.
And that is what we have talked about for 20 years. And, the public has got to decide, are they going to listen? Are they going to listen to the establishment news media? Who owns the news media in this country? It is the deep state, whatever you want to call this corrupt regime. But anytime you tell the truth, they immediately smear you. They go to work immediately to smear. And tarnish the image and credibility of anybody who dares to tell the truth. And then if somebody who just stumbles on information about a particular subject, they go online, and what do they see? They see articles saying anybody who believes in that, wears a tinfoil hat, is uneducated, believes, in wild conspiracy theories. No, we don't. No, I've been studying this for 20 years, and this is a real serious threat, and it's been underway for at least 20 years. Look, I can go back when I was a young teen growing up in Western Maryland, and the farmers were taking pot shots at airplanes because of weather modification, because we were experiencing droughts, and they were seeding the clouds. And it was they were doing the experiments for so long that the farmers started firing rifles at aircraft. All right, I mean, it got dangerous. Okay, people were just frustrated because of the drought, but they admitted that they were seeding the clouds.
Right, they were trying to manipulate the weather.
They were trying to do it, but then they denied that they were succeeding. They were experimenting, but it wasn't succeeding. Okay, we can't have it both ways. All right, so they were doing that. Was back in the 1960s, early 1970s. They were doing weather modification experiments on the East Coast of the United States. But here, what you have now is you have several powerful nations that are advancing towards military application of weather modification. Edward, I remember, I'm going to guess early 2000s, and I can't recall, 2001, 2002, I saw an article, I want to say the Telegraph of London, and it could have been the Independent or the Guardian. It was one of the major papers of London. And it was about a German scientist who said that he had just read a U.S. Pentagon report on weather modification. He attended a conference in Europe. I remember he was from Germany, and he said that he had never been more frightened in his life at what he read about military warfare. Now this, again, Doc, this was like
20 years ago.
Nearly 20 years ago. And I tried to find that scientist. I was unable to connect him. We didn't have social media then. I mean, you had to search for people the old-fashioned way.
Picking up the phone and
you had to actually make phone calls and say, "Do you know this man?" It was difficult to find people. I was never able to find him, but I always remembered that article. I was never able to obtain a copy of the report. That's what I wanted. I wanted a copy of the report. Might have been very dangerous to be in possession of that report.
Well, I wonder, because we've actually obtained two such reports. One actually detailing the Pentagon produced a paper in 1991 that they were trying to develop weather modification strats to basically dominate the world. And this was actually in 1991 with the goal date of achieving this domination by 2025. Now, critics of this paper claimed that it was just an imagination. It was basically a visionary quest. They invested money in it. They never moved forward. But the part I come back to is that we know that patents have been issued for Haarp. One such man, Dr. Bernard Eastland, in 1987 received a patent that was titled Method and Apparatus for Altering a Region in the Earth's Atmosphere, Ionosphere, and or Magnetosphere. And in this patent rig, he laid out not only could this technology be used, like what the South China Morning Post has detailed, to create a black hole on communications, not just on land, but in sea and also at high levels in the air, but it could also be used to radically heat areas of the environment. He actually focused more on the military application of this. But at the same time, people, when they look at this technology, they act like it doesn't exist. There clearly is on record attempts to basically wield the weather as a weapon.
I know we have a video of Dr. Eastland. Let's show it in a few minutes. We'll go back to this South China Morning Post report because there's more to talk about here. The The next article, this is from news.com in Australia. And news.com is owned by News Corp, Rupert Murdoch. So this would be, the Times of London, the Wall Street Journal. This is the same corporation, Fox News. All right. And their headline, this was August 26, 2018, a new Chinese radar facility could become a weapon hiding in plain sight. So News Corp recognized that there was a high-tech facility being built in China that Western military officials were concerned was a weather modification facility.
What I thought was interesting about this particular article, Rick, is that some of the phrasing and some of the paragraphs out of this article were the same as from that South China Morning Post article back earlier this year, too. And it seemed to say to me that there may have been a common press release at some point, maybe even the Chinese government putting out a press release saying, we have this facility, we have this technology, we're telling the world we have this now. We have this capability now, that we have the ability to make these changes within the atmosphere, make these changes within the weather. In other words, they're not hiding it, Rick.
No, it's in plain sight.
Right.
Now, the U.S. government denied it existed. They denied, and once you showed people pictures of Haarp, oh, well, yes, it's Haarp, but
all along.
We're making popcorn. We're learning a new way to make popcorn. I mean, they never would admit that it was for changing the atmosphere, okay? But the Chinese seem to be quite proud to talk about it.
Sure.
And South China Morning Post, listen, they had to get a green light from Beijing to go ahead and publish these articles. And this is not just one article, but a series of articles in the past year. But the South China Morning Post article well, actually, this was the news.com in Australia. It says, but a system which could blank out ELF, extremely low frequency communications, and selectively interfere with other satellite communications would severely affect any submarine operations in the South China Sea.
Now, so let's think about this. ELF is the communication system that submarines use, all submarines use. That's the way they communicate back to the home base, very low frequency. If you can disrupt the submarine communications where they're unable to either transmit or receive signals back from the home base, let's imagine you're a submarine captain and suddenly your communications are out. You're patrolling whatever area of the world and communications is out. You assume the worst. You assume, there's a total worldwide blackout of communications. You're not able to communicate and they're not able to communicate with you. You go into a wartime stance. I mean, imagine that you're a U.S. submarine commander. You've lost, your communications back to San Diego or Norfolk. I mean, you have to assume, hey, a nuclear bomb might have dropped in one of those locations. I'm on my own here. And that's how powerful this can be, the power to disrupt communications and break those chains of command and create catastrophes that would have to be responded to.
You speak of nuclear submarines. Sanya, which is the island where this radar system operates for the Chinese, is home to their nuclear fleet. They have a naval base that's housed on the island. It has their fleet of nuclear submarines and also serves as the research location for their, let's say, their entire corps of submariners. So it actually makes perfect sense for them to put this here. And it also brings into question any other projects the Chinese are putting, like the port in Haifa, where they'll be taking over a base which has served previously as a nuclear sub-command for the United States and maybe in the future Israel.
You're talking about Haifa, Israel.
Yes, Haifa, Israel.
And I did read today that the Israelis are officially reviewing the deal. Apparently the U.S. is putting a lot of pressure on Israel because Israel's turning the Haifa naval port over to the Chinese in 2021 or 2022. But the deal's already signed.
Yes, that's correct.
But the Chinese have not taken over the port yet. In this report, Stephen Chin a writer for South China Morning Post, suggested that the Chinese facility could be used to disrupt other countries' communication networks by creating an atmospheric black hole over surrounding areas. So the Chinese would have the ability to eliminate the ability of American ships, satellites, and submarines to communicate.
Yes. And it would allow cosmic rays from the ionosphere to enter in and disrupt all radio and communication that would go across the entire continent. Think of it as a controlled EMP from a distance. You wouldn't have to have a massive change, just a little bit of a change, a little bit of disruption to create total chaos here in North America.
Well, it essentially creates a digital black curtain. I mean, we're talking about the old Soviet Empire where you couldn't have information brought into Eastern Europe just simply based on limitations of transportation and also communications. This, in the digital era, in the modern era, could bring a nation to its knees. It's not just your military, your economy relies on reliable satellite connection. We know that with the 5G systems coming out that the economy is going to be wholly dependent, especially smart cities, on this technology. Autonomous cars, for example, can't have a break in the communication with a satellite because you would have the car veering off the road and crashing.
That's right. That's a good point. In 1998, when the Holy Spirit gave me the vision when I was working at TBN, April of 1998, and I saw cities on fire. And months later, I resigned my job at TBN, and God led me into this ministry. But from April to September, all right, I resigned from TBN in September of 1998. But between April and September, I spent a great deal of time in prayer, fasting, seeking the Lord.
Right.
What was the vision? What did I see? What does this mean? You showed me cities on fire. You showed me refugees. You showed me chaos. And he gave me Isaiah 24, verses 1 through 13 as the confirmation of the vision. Now, during that time, Doc, I didn't have another vision. I didn't hear God speaking. I didn't have any other supernatural experience from April to September. But I simply prayed a lot. I read a lot. I sought the Lord a lot, asking Him, tell me what I saw. And I wrote down the things that I heard. I'm talking about not audibly, just the thoughts, the words, the messages that came into my spirit. That's when I wrote down Osama bin Laden. That's when I wrote down nuclear suitcase bombs. Poisoned water supplies in America. And that's when I was writing down all these things. The currency crash by the derivatives, right? I had to go look up, what is a derivative, all right? But I kept hearing derivatives, all right? The derivatives will crash, okay? So I just kept writing down these things. Well, one of the things I wrote down was that just before a surprise attack on America, America's satellites would go dark. There would be no communication between satellites and U.S. military leaders. There would be darkness. When I say darkness, no communication, silence. It's very similar to what Henry Groover saw in a vision.
Right.
The military was trying to launch a counter attack, and they're pushing buttons and nothing's happening. All right. What would cause that? All right. So we assume it was EMP, and that was another thing that I heard: electromagnetic pulse attack. But you look at this: the ability to put a black hole over a geographic region.
Without destroying the satellites in orbit, without doing any of that, just break the lines of communication.
Yes.
Even if you could do it for 5 minutes.
That's all you need.
Just 5 minutes, you could launch a surprise attack on the U.S.
Yes.
And you have to know that these scenarios are being played out in the minds of the leadership in Russia and China because they perceive America to be a threat not only to them financially and politically, but morally as well. I mean, they perceive America to be that threat that's threatening the whole world. And so they're looking for that opportunity, Rick, to be able to take us out.
And you think about this, if you really perceive this to be a real threat, okay, you would drill for this. Well, it just so happens in Zapad 2018, this past year, the drill they did with the Chinese, I'm talking about the Russian military, they actually did, as part of the drill, a mass communications array test, where they attempted to have relay sites across the whole span of Russia, from the east of Russia to the west of Russia. And they were doing relay spots, sometimes with physical wiring, to maintain a communication grid. At the time, just thought this was interesting because we know the Russians have developed advanced S-300, S-400, S-500 systems, which also have the ability to deny communications. We know that because the Jordanians and the Israelis have said this based on the systems that are on the Golan Heights. But with this new information, I suspect that they were also testing the ability to withstand and maybe survive the U.S. version of what the Chinese have laid down as being a potential weapon of the future.
That's a great thought there.
It is. Popular Mechanics magazine. They published an article, June 11, 2018. China's giant ionosphere zapping radar is a defense system masquerading as science. Well, I'm so glad to see the Popular Mechanics is now publishing conspiracy theories. Here they are. I mean, for years, Popular Mechanics mocked the people in America who said that Haarp was a military project.
Right.
But now, Popular Mechanics says the Chinese project is a military project. Wonder what made them see the light.
We're on the receiving end of it now. That's what made them see the light.
Is that what it is?
So,
the Chinese may use our technology on us? That's basically what it is.
Yeah, I think a memo went out, Rick, earlier this year. We know that it's become a major national security focus of President Trump's administration. Vice President Mike Pence has given a speech on this, along with Mike Pompeo. I think that these magazines are now attempting to paint what the Chinese are doing as something very, very magnificent, something evil, when, as you've already noted, Haarp is something that predated much of what China has even published in their recent paper, going back to 2012.
The U.S. government officially shut down Haarp several years ago.
Really?
Yes. They shut it down, Doc.
That's what they said.
Around 2014, something like that.
Gave it to the University of Alaska.
Yeah, but it's still operating, but not by the federal government, but by the University of Alaska, Fairbanks.
With grants from...
With millions of dollars of grants from government agencies. All right, so it's still operating, but the people who are now under new management, Haarp is under new management. That's really what the sign says.
And it's for research purposes now.
Yes. What was
they
it
were still
before?
doing research before,
Yes.
but research manipulating the weather
Yes.
and manipulating the ionosphere.
So the people at the University of Alaska, they want people to stop believing in conspiracy theories, and they've been holding open houses and letting Alaska citizens come in and walk around the Haarp facilities, which is about 40 acres of antennas. Mm-hmm. That's kind of like a big super shortwave antenna farm.
Right. That's right.
All right. And so they've been doing these things, public relations, to end the conspiracy theories about Haarp. Yet at the same time, U.S. magazines are promoting the same, quote, conspiracy theories about China.
Yes.
And we're now being told it can do mind control. It can penetrate the skull. It could trigger an earthquake.
We've got to stop those Chinese.
Got to stop the Chinese. Look what they're doing. All right? The very same things that we said Haarp possibly was doing. Now, the American publications are saying this is what China's doing. We have a news report from NBC TV 11 Fairbanks, KTVF, Channel 11 in Fairbanks, and this was just televised just a week ago, December 4th.
That's correct. They actually invited even scientists from Norway to come out to this open house. And Rick, I had never seen Haarp in action. What's shown in this video is absolutely real, and they're making the argument it's used for research, not for weaponization.
All right, here's compliments of KTVF TV11 in Fairbanks. Here's their report.
A world-class research facility right here in Alaska, hosting scientists from all over the country and the world this week for a research campaign. Sarah Tewksbury traveled to Gukana to learn more about the research they are conducting at this controversial site known as Haarp.
Scientists from around the states, as well as Norway, flew up to Alaska to stay in the remote community of Gukona.
It allows us to turn the ionosphere into a laboratory.
Home to a research facility and known for its 180 antennas, the high-frequency active auroral research program's site flashes red lights while radar watches for planes and scientists man the operations center, but otherwise quiet. Although it may not look like much is happening behind me, these 180 antennas are currently transmitting radio signals up into the highest portion of the atmosphere, known as the ionosphere. This facility is the most powerful one of its kind in the world. The loudest part of this research being conducted is the locomotive-sized engines powering the antennas. You can hear the power go up and down as the experiments are ongoing, sending waves of signals up into the atmosphere.
So Haarp allows us to study the way the radio waves interact with the ionosphere, and radio waves are important for our modern society, for communication, navigation, and radar.
Once owned by the Department of Defense, the University of Alaska Fairbanks now runs the facility, only one of 4 in the world, focused on the research.
So this is the Haarp control room. This is where the experiments for a campaign are programmed, and this is where those experiments are run.
One visiting researcher explains how he uses Haarp to study the way that the ionosphere can interrupt GPS communications.
I can mimic nature and understand more of that and construct ways of kind of mitigating the impact that has on positioning systems and navigation.
But the university also has another job they have to focus on: dispelling conspiracy theories.
We have open house once a year. We do a lot on Facebook and out there to let people know that, here's what we're doing. It's all about science.
Dozens of publications and even a book have been written about the conspiracies believed to be involved with Haarp.
I wish people had a better understanding of what radio waves cannot do. They cannot manipulate the weather. They cannot create earthquakes, for example.
They even made a point to post on Twitter stating that they weren't involved in the November 30th earthquake that happened in Anchorage. McCoy doesn't think the university's efforts will ever fully dispel the conspiracy theories.
No matter how many open houses we have, no matter how many times we bring people in and show them every little thing, there'll always be some people who want to believe that there's something strange happening.
While wanting to put these theories to rest, we were still limited on where we could film. The scientists are focused on conducting their research without any distractions. This expensive, powerful research facility only has a few campaigns a year. This is Sarah Tewksbury reporting.
But the South China Morning Post said that scientists are concerned that these devices could trigger earthquakes, change the weather, and affect the human brain.
Yes. And in fact, no less than Mr. Zbigniew Brzezinski. Remember him from way back. This was back in the 80s, somewhere in the late 80s, where the first idea of this, using high ELF signals to manipulate, weather. Also said that in a paper that he was a co-author on, said that they could be used for mind control over large populations.
You're talking about Joe Scarborough's father-in-law.
Yes, right. And so this has been going on.
Could be used for mind control over large populations.
And so, so it's not conspiracy theory when it's a fact that even people like Zbigniew Brzezinski is saying this. I don't doubt that the University of Alaska is doing research now. I don't doubt that at all. I believe DARPA has moved on to bigger projects than this, that they've found new ways that they can do the same thing without having such a large exposed facility. That's my opinion only. We know that DARPA is involved in myriad projects. I just believe they've moved their processing on to somewhere else.
I agree.
So
I agree.
But China now is being open about it. They're saying, we've got this technology. We've got it now, and we're willing to use it.
Yeah, just to reiterate how the establishment news media here has vilified anybody who talks about weather modification, weather warfare, chemtrails. Yeah. Oh, there's no such thing as chemtrails. All right, who are you going to believe? You're going to believe the news media, or you're going to believe your lying eyes? I can look up in the sky and see them.
That's correct.
And they say they don't exist. They do exist. I'm looking at them. I look up and the sky is full of them.
Right.
Okay? Fake clouds. I watch them disperse. I watch them make fake clouds. And I've been aware of it for 20 years. Going back, I know 1990, at least 1999, I was aware of the chemtrails. And I tried to get people to see it. Tried to, and you literally point people's head right up, say, look at that. And they go, look at what?
Well, that's when they came up with the line that it's a contrail. Yes. It's simply a contrail. Yeah, well, it became so abundant they had to address it, and they said it was just something that was a byproduct of planes.
I've seen contrails my whole life. I know what a contrail is.
That's right.
And I know what a chemtrail is. And these things, all right, that make a cross, you see them, there's always a cross in the sky. All right. We seldom see them here in Florida. And that's one of the benefits of being here, but several times a year, they spray us pretty heavy. And not this past weekend, but the weekend before, I walked outside on a Saturday and the sky was full of them. And the sky had this milky white appearance. But I'm watching the jets. I'm watching them spray.
Right.
All right. I see the trails. So I thought, okay, where's the X? And I started looking around and I spotted the X. It was on the south side of the sky. There's always an X. But I want to put up this NBC News. Now this is May 22, 2014, NBC News. Conspiracy theories abound as U.S. military closes Haarp. Conspiracy theories. Mm-hmm. Of course, just conspiracy theories. But now, Popular Mechanics says those Chinese are up to something
dastardly nefarious
down there. They're doing something with the weather. They're going to try to control our minds.
And they're using ELF waves to do it.
Yes.
And you're like going, wait a minute.
And they're beaming, into the ionosphere. And they're heating up the atmosphere. Look what they're doing. Yes, that's what Haarp did.
Yes.
So I just wanted to show how NBC was part of the cover-up, the lying. I mean, what do we expect? I mean, this is what True News does. For every 20 years, we've had to battle the deception, the lying, the cover-up, and we're succeeding. Sometimes